Hi, I'm Rod Koch from Syracuse, New York, for anybody that may not know me. And Brother Thad asked me if I could have this presentation, and my wife says, "You're not retired, how can you have this presentation?" And I said, "Well, I guess I talk about it. I guess I talk about it a lot because everybody thinks that's all I talk about now is retirement, because I have such my job is so encouraging every day, I guess." But anyway, I mean, basically what I put together today is what I have been, the things I've been thinking about as I contemplate retirement someday, and I don't know if that's, my financial planner asked me when I wanted to retire. I said tomorrow, and he said, well, it'd be better if you didn't do that. But anyway, but some of the questions I've been thinking about, especially meditating on from the spiritual perspective, you know, as I look out and try to wonder what the Lord has for me if He tarries the next couple of years. So I entitled this "Retirement: The Final Frontier," for those of you who are old enough to remember Star Trek, or young enough to have seen the movies. Okay, so what is retirement? Well, some people think it's the world's longest coffee break. Other people think it's a time where you can kick back and do whatever you want, when you want to do it, and however you want to do it. And here's Google's 10 most asked questions about retirement in their search engine. How much do I need to retire? How do I retire early? When can I retire? What is the retirement age? How much should I save for retirement? How do I save for retirement? How do I retire at 50? How to retire, period? And what is the full retirement age for Social Security? And where can I retire where it'll be cheap enough that I can actually live? So, Brother Jeff's going to help me out here because he is an expert in retirement. So I satisfied Evelyn by saying I would get someone who actually has experience to help me out. And so we kind of looked at the biblical view of retirement, or some examples of retirement in the Bible. So we know that the Levites were supposed to retire at age 50 here from their service to the Lord, although they continued to minister. We know that most of the people in the Bible, they didn't have Social Security, of course, and really didn't have the same expectations of retirement that we have today. Moses, served basically until the day he died. Joshua, when he was very old, was told to divide the land and to the people. And David was retired from war after he had a near-death experience. Most of the early most of the early apostles did not have a retirement. Most of them were martyred, except for John. So it's kind of difficult maybe for us in the 21st century to look to the Bible and say, well, here's what retirement should look like, because we have all these examples of people that lived to an old age and had an opportunity perhaps to do something more leisurely. At least it's the way we look at it from an American perspective. So I'm calling this the little red hen paradox here. That used to be one of my dad's stories he liked to read to us as a child. Those of you that don't remember the little red hen, she wanted to bake a cake or something, and she went and asked everybody for help, and nobody wanted to help her. So finally she said, okay, I'll do it all myself. And so she went and baked the cake all by herself, and then after she baked the cake, of course, everybody that she had asked to help came and wanted to have a piece of cake. And she told them she thought that she would eat it all by herself too, right? So, as Americans, when we look at a retirement, I think a lot of times we think about, wow, I finally got to the point where I've earned enough, or I've saved enough money where I can retire. And so now, back to the cat picture, I can do whatever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want, right? But I mean, from a biblical perspective, if we look at that, we look at the parable of the certain rich man that, built bigger barns, said he was going to build bigger barns and create more wealth, and God said, "Thou fool, today your life's going to be taken." And so I don't think that that's the biblical view of retirement. And on the other hand, Paul pointed out that God's given us richly all things to enjoy. So I don't think that we necessarily need to feel bad about using what we may have accumulated over the years to in some respects. But again, if we look back to a real biblical view of this, we have to look at the Apostle Paul, who said, "But what things were gained to me, those I counted lost for Christ." So I think that whatever God's given us richly to enjoy, we have a responsibility to use richly for His purposes. So as I thought about it, these were kind of the main questions that came to me as an American, from the American culture, the U.S. culture, as far as thinking about retirement, and from a Christian viewpoint and from a secular viewpoint. So, okay, how long am I going to live? And the corollary to that is, what's the quality of life going to be for me? Can I afford to retire? And after I retire, where's my vision of self-worth going to come from, or how am I going to feel after I retire and I don't have to go to my job every day? Because somehow my job, unbeknownst to me, in spite of the difficulties in my job, there's a certain self-worth that I get from perpetuating my role in my organization. And what is God's purpose for me in retirement? Are there relationships that need to be repaired or strengthened, especially at this time? And how do I pass the torch to the next generation and finish strong? Spiritually speaking. So I think this is a difficult question for all of us, is, how long am I going to live? Well, I don't know, and if I do live, am I going to have good health, whether it be mental and physical? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. Only the Lord knows. In Psalm 90 it says that, "Lord, teach me to count my days, the number of my days." Right? So there's kind of a dual perspective here, that while we don't know how long we're going to live, yet we're required to be good stewards, and we're required to give account to God when we get to heaven as to how we used our time and the energy that He's given us. Right? So I have to focus on living each day that He's given me, and on the other hand, I may continue to live longer than I think, so I have to keep praying and planning for the future. So the average lifespan of a male who reaches 65, which used to be retirement age back in my parents' day, is 18 more years, and for a female it's 20 years or more. And with good genes or good health, here retirement planners nowadays in America are telling you, well, you need to plan for, you're 65, you need to plan for 30 to 35 years of retirement to be safe, right? Your money's going to last that long. So, Jeff, do you want to add any realism into this presentation here?
Yeah. I used to talk to my friends at work about retirement, and they would say, if you don't have like $3 million saved up for you in your 401k, you shouldn't retire.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where did you work?
I never got there.
Well, Susie Wormont is telling people they need $5 to $10 million.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. If you
live
want
on
to
the
continue
coast.
that, do you want to fly all over the world still after you retire? That kind of stuff.
If you want to live in California.
But that was from my culture, my working culture. And what I found is, if you don't if you take care of your stuff beforehand, like get rid of your mortgage, get rid of all your debts, you don't need that kind of money. Then you can prepare if you, the Bible says, oh no man, if you take that to heart and get rid of your debts, you don't need that kind of stuff and you'll be fine. That's my experience. And also I think of poor Moses. He was 80 before he got his assignment. You know, and I still think about that. He didn't start to work till he was 80, or for God's specific purpose task. That makes me think all the time.
And how much did he need during those 40 years of building?
Caleb went and started to build a new city when he was 85.
Yep.
Brother Jeffrey, you never told me about needing that much. You didn't warn me.
That's like, you don't need to leave.
Okay. So, yeah, can I afford to retire here? So one of the challenges we have, those of us in the U.S. here, is that generally people have saved less than they should have, because especially nowadays, for those that started after my parents' generation, there's a lot fewer pensions, traditional pensions. Personal savings on average are low, and Social Security, fewer contributors. We don't let all those immigrants in. I don't know who's going to pay for my retirement, but anyway. And there's more people drawing on it because the baby boom generation, the biggest generation, largest generation, is all retiring now, starting to retire. And of course, healthcare keeps getting more expensive, and we use healthcare more as we get older. So people say, well, you need $350,000 just to pay for a plan on $350,000 just to pay for your healthcare. On the other hand, in North America here, we have too much, and the Bible says, it's difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And in North America, anybody that's got an income of $32,400 per year, you're in the top 1% in the world. Yet, on the other hand, a lot of times we have the feeling that we always need a little bit more. A reporter asked John D. Rockefeller once, how much money do you need? And he says, always just a little bit more, right? So it doesn't make, a lot of times, our perception is that we always need more. I know every time I think about retirement, that's the first thought that comes to me is, well, if I had just a little bit more, I'd be more ready for retirement, right? So the solution to this is, while we know we need to trust in the Lord, Jesus also pointed out that, if a person's going to build a building, they got to go see if they got resources to build it. If they're going to go to war, they got to count the resources they got. So I don't think that Jesus was against planning. And I think from a retirement standpoint, it's important to start thinking about this now, because one of the things that we've realized in our life, and maybe we're a little late here starting ourselves, but as our parents aged, there were things that would have been easier for us if they had done planning earlier on certain things, right? So right now, Evelyn and I are going through a process of meeting with the lawyer, doing some estate planning. That sounds weird, right? Estate planning, like, I have lots of money, but not enough to retire. But, the things that are really important here that we found here is health proxy, right? So if you wait until all of a sudden you need a health proxy, that's too late, right? It's better to make your wishes known up front and have that in writing and legalized, and then your children or whoever your health proxy is has to deal with that. They already know what your wishes are, and that's spelled out. Same thing with incapacity. So a couple years ago, when Evelyn's mom started to become forgetful, she went to the bank and she got this power of attorney signed and da-da-da. And now we went and met with the estate planner, and the estate planner says, well, New York's got a separate form, and you didn't get that signed, and And so now, down the road here, mom's even more forgetful, and we gotta bring her in and hope that she's gonna have, the lawyer's gonna determine she's lucid enough to make these decisions again, and we can't communicate all these more complex legal things. We cannot get the decisions we want. We thought that we had or that we want, right? And so, so excluding, strictly excluding money and things, there's other planning that needs to be done. Also, it's important to have a will, of course. If you die and you don't have a will, then it's gonna be up to the state to determine what happens to your estate, whether small or big. Okay, as Brother Jeff said here, it's important to get no debts. Makes things a lot easier. Owe no man anything.
Comment? A comment?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I did, and I'm sure other people here, I did I was the executor for my parents when they passed. It is so nice to have everything done, because they took care of that stuff. They didn't have much. In fact, I told my dad, take me out of the will, because all you're gonna do is divide up your bills, and I don't really wanna pay. So, but that was my joke, but they had the will and estate and everything laid out. And then thankfully my family was totally non-combative. That can really destroy a family. And
Speaking from the opposite end, please have a will. Please. Probate is a real exciting course to go through. And as Jeffrey said, relatives come out of the woodwork and want $10 more. And I'm not joking, so make sure you have a will and everything is at least outlined for how to go.
Well, one of the things my dad did that always drove me crazy was, because he had all these apartments that he owned and stuff, and back when the estate tax limit was much lower, before the last two increases, he went to a lawyer and they created all this system of trusts, and well, we had to deal with some of that. Before he passed away. There was one trust that we had to deal with every year, and this was just, I thought it was bad. But on the other hand, when he passed away, everything passed to the trust, avoided probate, and people tell me, it's gonna take you at least a year to get out of probate. I don't know how long did it take you to go through probate?
Yeah, you're a little bit low.
Yeah.
You're talking about
2 years.
2 years of fun and excitement.
Right. So Evelyn and I told her, when we're gonna talk to the planner, let's ask her about trust, because from what I hear, probate's a nightmare, and if we could pass most things through a trust, that would make things a lot simpler for the kids.
Let me just add just one more point to emphasize that even more strongly, because I think it's important. My uncle was fairly wealthy. He was single, but he was a corporate manager at Ford. And when he died, my cousin was the executor to the estate. And one day he called me up and he said, Bob, he says, I'm just sick. I gotta write a check to the federal government for $1 million out of our uncle's estate, because he didn't take care of that. It is important.
So, even if you don't have the, whatever, I think it's 11 million, they just raised it to what, 11 million or something like that, even if you don't have that big of a estate, I don't know, I'm making the personal decision that it's gonna be easier to go, it's gonna be easier to pay a lawyer now, and then the kids they won't have to go through the whole probate process, or trust, I'm sorry.
I think it cost us like $700 to set up the trust for my wife and I. That's cheap compared to all that probate stuff.
It's also not for everybody. Probate can work. For me, with my parents, it was fairly straightforward. And so that, and depending on how much one wants to put trust and there are limitations then to what you can do
Right.
if circumstances in your life change where you might need the money or what, and so on. So make sure you really get the ins and outs of it before
Right.
committing to something like that that may not be, you may not be able to change it.
Right, right, so I guess I should have given the disclaimer up front that I'm not a financial planner. I was trying to concentrate more on the spiritual aspects here, but, those are some of the considerations that you should at least think about. And since I haven't experienced the probate process, I'm only going on the horror stories that I hear on the internet, but that could be not necessarily,
Reflective
simple.
of what everybody.
Reflective of my 80% of the people experience.
Are you gonna talk more about the financial aspects or not?
I
Okay.
think I'm pretty well done.
I have a comment then
Yeah.
to make along those lines, and that is, starting early in terms of savings or investing is really critical because compounding works much better between the ages of 20 and 30 till retirement than if you start at 50 and start thinking about retirement. Take advantage of all the stuff your company offers in terms of matching funds. Make sure you get 100% of that because it's free money and you'll never get 100% return on your investment the same day that you put it in the account. So, compound interest, if you work it out, I mean, it's amazing what it does.
You need to let the people know in the youth.
Yes.
I know, that's the problem right now.
Nobody
That's
We should have named this different, or something
And
different.
it's also, critical, this idea of following the American dream. I'd like to hear that one too, but I chose this one, told you I was coming. And the fact that I see nothing wrong as long as your commitment to the Lord is first and above all else. But there's a great deal that can be done good with money. We've seen that in the endowment, we've seen that in the foundation.
Right,
And so I would not poo-poo, just not paying any attention to financial matters, because you may need somebody to take care of you in the future, or you may need those resources. Okay, we trust the Lord. How does that saying go? Pray like it's all in the Lord's hands, but work like you need to make it happen, something to that effect. And I would just simply encourage the fact that pursue the best you can in whichever areas you're going through. And the financial areas, I would also be concerned about that. We're responsible to be good stewards. I think that also means that we need to do the planning and anticipate the kinds of things that can be done, that should be done, benefit our family, but remember the church, remember the foundation in terms of the increases that we receive there. That's also the Lord's money. And there's a great deal that can be done with that money, and not for oneself entirely, but the Lord needs to be remembered in all of that too. That's my soapbox.
And I try to get off the financial, I know that you want to express it, but one thing that my wife and I did with our kids, not, now they both graduated from college and they're both working, but when they had internships, co-ops with college, and also when they had summer jobs after they were 18, what we told them that we would do is we would match them if they would put money in a Roth IRA. So let's say they might have income of one summer of $2,000. Well, that's the most they can put in an IRA, but if they put $1,000 of their money in the IRA, we would put 1,000 in. And our daughter's gotten a habit of every internship, every summer job, that they would take, they'd try to get mom and dad about as much as they could. But if you have the means and you have children or grandchildren, to kind of, if you can help them out and check with the parents and say, hey, if you got a summer job where you're getting a W-2, at the end of the year, you know, you can put this much money in a, you know, IRA, and I'll match it. So they got in the habit. Of course, our daughters both said, you know, when they started working full-time, is this still gonna happen? I go, no. It's called a 401K.
Jeff's gonna, money got squirreled away and I didn't spend it because I didn't have it, right? So. Now I wish I would have spent more, I would have put more and more in, but you know, I did most years except when we hit, during years we had, I always got at least the match. And except in the years when the kids were, we had all the expenses of the kids, I most of the time I maxed it out before we had kids, and now after we had fewer expenses on that side. Okay, so in the things I've read about, and the challenge I have too whenever I've had a rough day at work and I think about quitting is, well, if I quit my job, who am I, right? Not that, I don't know if I'm still wondering if I'm going to have this problem because I have 40 hours of work outside of work every week, it seems like. I don't really think I'm going to have a problem figuring out what to do, but there is a certain, you know, I'm a project manager, you know, I work with the local project management association and things like that, and so there is some concept of self that, you know, I hate to admit, I don't like to admit, but that's tied up in my concept of worth that I have tied up in my job title and my job role, but you know, a lot of times you hear these stories about people that, you know, they work all their lives and then they retire and then a month or two they pass away, you know, or they become depressed, or you know, and their life goes downhill really fast. And I think it's important even for us as Christians, you know, to realize that, especially for us as Christians, is that to think about this and to think about, you know, what would we do in retirement? How are we going to give back to the Lord in retirement? So, for my wife, I think this is a lot easier, you know. She just goes from being a parent to being a grandmother, you know. For me as a male, I don't think it's not quite as easy for me because I don't think my sense of my role as a, you know, I hate to say this, as a father, I don't think, or a grandfather, I don't think is tied up as much in the relationships that, you know, that my wife has with the kids or the grandkids. I mean, my wife, sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, she enjoyed the kids more when they're little, right? And I enjoy the kids more when they're teenagers. You know, I could go out, I could do things with them. They'd go for a run with me. They'd teach me how to run, and they'd wait for me when I was out of breath and things like that, you know. And for me, I know the teenagers, you know, people say, oh, that's a really hard age, but you know, in some ways, you know, that was more, I was more connected to my kids then than when they were little, and I was trying to figure out how to put curlers in my daughter's hair because Evelyn wasn't home, when Evelyn wasn't home, right? So, and I really have no desire to change grandkids' diapers. But I changed my kids' diapers because that was my role, but I may have to do that yet, but we'll see. You know, other people, they've got hobbies, and so for retirement, oh, I'm going to golf, I'm going to travel, you know, I'm going to do all the things that I enjoyed, and but a lot of people, they go and they do that for a couple, maybe a year, and they find out, oh, I don't know, I'm kind of bored now, I guess I'll go back to work, right? Sometimes, you know, I think we, you know, we can expect our spouse to fulfill or tend to our needs in retirement. You know, I think Evelyn sometimes, you know, says, well, you know, finally I'll have Rod at home. Rod will be present. Finally, Rod will be present. He won't be at work all the time or off the foundation meeting, or you know, he'll really be there for me. I don't know. I don't know if I can live up to that expectation, right? But, or, you know, Brother Scott had a sermon here last week in Syracuse about substituting activity for being, you know. Sometimes we just, in order to avoid dealing with difficult spiritual issues or with our concept of having worth in Christ, we go out and we stay active. If I can stay active, then maybe it's even good things. Maybe it's even, church activities or that. But sometimes just the act of staying active keeps us from having to deal with more difficult issues in our life that the Lord really wants us to deal with. Right? So our ultimate solution, I think, here is making sure that our worth comes from Christ who died for us, because it doesn't come from our role or position in life. It's not from what we do or achieve, but our whole being is given to us by God's grace and by what Christ has done for us in dying on the cross. And it is important to seek what He wants us to do and look at transitioning to a new calling or what He expects of us in retirement, and to make an intentional choice to do that instead of just falling into whatever might come natural. Jeff, you want?
I was thinking, about hobbies. You better have, if you're gonna look at hobbies, you better have to practice some to find out what a hobby is before you retire. And I took that spiritually a little farther. Acts talks about Jesus who went around doing good. And that is such a simple example. If we could find a way to do good for our neighbors or friends, to find somebody that has some need and do that good, that is what you really have to practice. So you know what you're gonna be able to do good when you retire. You really should be starting to do that already. That's the kind of thought I had on that.
Brother Dave, I don't know, from a psychologist's viewpoint, do you want to comment on what our worth were, on any more on self-worth, or where any hiccups you see going into retirement as far as dealing with that concept?
Well, I think that is very much an issue in our culture in general, that worth, particularly for men, comes from job and what we do, where we spend a good deal of our life. There were times in my life when I probably spent more time at work than I spent with my wife in actual interactions, So that has to transition, and how does that work out? And sometimes, husbands can be underfoot of their wives. You've got ideas as to how things should be done, and she's been doing it 40 years her way. I married him for better or for worse, but not for that. So there are transitions where you're not in charge necessarily in her domain, if that's the way it's been developed over time. But there are stories of people who make very poor choices during retirement, or planning on retiring and finding out that it's not possible for them to do it. I've talked with people who basically have committed themselves to recognizing they've got to live the rest of their life working, because there's nobody that they can count on to take care of them. They don't have enough to retire, and so they will do that. And that's where I think the rest of us come in terms of we need to help those folks. And I always had the impression that I should be involved in church. I should be involved in things that would, in a sense, transition me over into retirement, if that comes. Neither of my parents retired. The Lord called them home before that. That has saved myself and my brothers and sisters a lot of future difficulties of being sandwiched between your own children and grandchildren and elderly parents who need help and assistance too. So our self-worth, we really need to recognize that comes in our Christian being, and those things. And we shouldn't substitute activity for being. But if our activity comes out of our being in the Lord, I think that's ideal, because it makes that transition easier.
One thing with the self-worth I'd like to add, I've been retired now for 3 years. My wife has been retired for 2 years. I was in middle management. My wife was in top management. She was the chief financial officer. And we had donated money through the years. I was very fortunate when I went to college. I had a full tuition scholarship from Wayne State. So I got to go to school for free. So for years, we've been giving back to Wayne State. And so they had us, it was very nice. We had an opportunity to go down and they're building a new business building. We had a chance to go through the construction site and have lunch with the dean and all that. But the thing that was weird for both my wife and I was, here we are on this agenda, and normally when we went anywhere or had an agenda, had meetings, that type of thing, pretty much our job positions would explain why we're there. You know,
Right.
she would be somewhere, well, you know, she's chief financial officer, she would already be recognized as an expert in the area, you know, in charge of all the finances related to her company. So it was very apparent why you're there. So it was, I mean, it didn't give us trauma,
Right.
but we just noticed it the first time down when we were gonna be in a, like a meeting situation where we didn't have our titles. And it took a little bit of adjustment.
Yeah, retired, posting your position on LinkedIn as retired just doesn't quite do it to your staff.
So like I said, it is a different mindset. You have to get used to things that, so it's a little bit of effort.
One comment on the wife, the spouse thing. You, in my position, I was the boss at work. You come home, you are no longer the boss. And that is an adjustment for two people. She's been, like David said, she's been doing it 40 years while I'm working overtime.
Right.
And I come home, it's okay. I don't have to be the boss.
So, C.S. Lewis, the Christian author, says, "You're never too old to set a new goal or dream a new dream." So from a Christian perspective, I think that's more of the approach that we need to take. We already talked about some of this, I think here, but I mean the challenges some of the challenges that I think about here is, well, number one, you know, when I was young and first came into the youth workforce, I was always enthusiastic, and I see these crusty old guys that were cynical about every change that happened in the corporation and that, you know, I think, what's the matter with these guys, you know? Now I find in my old age, you know, I'm thinking, oh, another corporate change. If I have to go through this again, is this really going to make it any better than it was? I've seen too many of these fail, and why are we doing this? Or just feeling burned out, you know? Sometimes, you know, if you've done a job for too many years, you know it's time for a change, and it just doesn't always happen as fast as you'd like sometimes here. Or it happens and it's not the change you wanted. You know, sometimes, you know, if you start thinking about, I need X number of dollars, you start worrying about the finances, you know, it's just overwhelming to think about it, you know. And on the other hand, you know, if you, wow, you know, I'm older here, you know, the world owes it to me now, you know, I've suffered and been beat up here, and I've survived the corporate world for, you know, almost 40 years, you know, I worked hard, and God owes me some leisure here. God owes me some downtime. But, I mean, the solution to this is renewal, I think, is the focus, you know. In Isaiah 40, you know, it says that, you know, God promises to renew our strength if we trust in Him, we'll rise up and wings of eagles. And, you know, again, turning back to a verse that we know from our youth, you know, if we trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not into our own understanding, you know, and acknowledge Him in all His ways, that He's going to direct our paths. Again, in our theme this week, you know, God promises outpouring of His Spirit even upon the old, or those of us that are older. So there's, over time, as someone already mentioned here, Caleb, at 85, Caleb takes on, requests Hebron, where the biggest giants were, and some of the most challenging, one of the most challenging areas in the conquest of Canaan, and he asks for that as his inheritance at age 85. So as long as the Lord still gives us strength, and there's opportunity for renewal. The good news about old age here is that people tend to get happier here in old age. I'm still waiting for this part of the curve to kick in here.
I believe that happiness correlates to your realization of your expectations. So your expectations, you're not expecting to get another $1 million or
Right.
achieve great things, but you're starting to look around and saying, this is what I have. Lord's provided all this, and man, I should be really thankful. And then there's a phrase that a very wise person keeps reminding me, my oldest sister, of course.
I think I see your older brother.
Well, my sister actually says to me, tells me about the new normal. Your situation changes, and it's not going downhill, it's just your new normal. And so you learn to live within your new normal. I don't know if that helps a lot of people, but I know it helps me.
Okay, so if I adjust my expectations low enough, I'll be all set, right?
As you get older, you'll
Yes.
figure it out.
Yeah, it stands to reason that this is known as in common language as the bathtub curve, okay, because of its shape. And you've got all the childbearing responsibilities and the work and so on, and it's downhill till about a time when the children get old enough to manage themselves for the most part, and then they're eventually out on their own, and it increases as life continues. Notice that it's actually happier for females, in the 70s,
Yeah.
starting about there, than it is for males. In fact, that's true almost all the way through. But it is interesting to see how it works.
What is the scale?
It was just a
Well-being.
rank,
Oh,
it's
well-being.
well-being, WB.
Yeah.
Okay, just in general.
Yeah. And people simplify it by calling it health, happiness, or life satisfaction. It's a person's own rating of how they feel on a scale. Okay, so in Psalm 92:14, it promises that the righteous will still bring forth fruit in old age. And in Ruth, we see the story of Naomi, how she came back to Israel. She said, call me bitter. Call me bitter. And yet in verses 14 through 15, we see the transformation of Naomi's life from one of bitterness to joy through her daughter-in-law and her grandchild. We touched on this a little bit already. I think, we talked about the challenges of, okay, now if I personally retire, and maybe this is too much from a male standpoint, but I retire and I come home, and if my wife has spent a lot of time being the CEO of the home, we could come into conflict here. And also, when you're down in the trough there and you're focusing on raising the kids, whether you like it or not, you realize that your relationship with your spouse you can lose some of that, just because the focus becomes on your children so much, and you lose some of that alone time and some of the time that you had earlier in your married relationship. And I think not only your spousal relationship, but I think in general, I think those of us that are out in the work life, that a lot of times, we've developed these relationships at work. And I don't know about you, but I don't really have that many close friends from work. I have a few people that I'm closer to than others, those, especially other believers that I may have met at work, or that, we can talk about deeper things. But most of my relationships at work are really what I would call transactional or business oriented. It's I maintain the relationship that I need to get the job done, and I want to go on and go home, right? Which is probably not as best. But, you know, again, we may retire and then find out, well, but we did get something from those relationships, and we find out now we feel alone, or we feel like we don't really have any close relationships, we don't really have the people that we came in contact with every day, really, they're still working, so they're not really necessarily even interested in maintaining any type of relationship. So, if married, and of course we should be doing this all through our married life, but I think there needs to be, again, more of a focus here on nurturing our relationship. And we need, I think, to, if we don't have any already, we need to start building other strong relationships. So
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to provide spiritual mentorship to the next generation. Opportunities to reach out to others, provide physical and spiritual aid, and to build relationships with our missions at home or abroad. Opportunities to help others who are aging or need support perhaps in their older ages. And Brother Jeff pointed out in an email to me that, you know, it's important if we have a hobby, that we don't have to do these just go out and travel the world just by ourselves or whatever, but we can use our retirement time to build relationships and minister to other people. So one thing that I thought of was, again, small church visits. You know, it's kind of scary sometimes if you go to a small church, and I was in DC last year for a conference, and I was thinking, okay, should I really, you know, it's kind of hard, I gotta leave the conference, I gotta go to church, and I gotta get back there, you know, and so I show up in Upper Marlboro, you know, and everybody's just so happy just to see you, you know, just because I showed up, you know, I just had to show up and be myself, and yeah, it was a big a big encouragement to them. So, so I think it's important, you know, it depends on, again, like Brother Jeff said, or Brother Dave, or both, how we use our time, and not that having money can give us opportunities to do some good for the Lord. Again, passing the torch, I guess this is kind of, in some ways, somewhat redundant here, but is there a way that I can take the life lessons that I've learned, whether spiritual, family, business, technical, is there a way to help others and just share these with the next generation? So, obviously here, our grandchildren offer natural opportunities for us to do that as we get older. There's always the opportunity here to help us feel young at heart, to continue to participate in activities that bring us closer to those younger than ourselves. I wouldn't recommend holding a retirement session because that obviously doesn't interest them. But you can volunteer as part of a work team or a mission project. We've had some work teams that went to Paraguay, and we've had some older, mostly younger people, but occasionally an older believer will come, and you know, I think it was really encouraging to them and to the younger people. Youth group may be looking for people to share testimonies or experiences. I think just going to church camp, you know, it's always inspiring when you go to church camp. You see some of the older people there, and that have been active for years, and I think that's another way to be able to interact with the large youth population there. There's other ways to look for, provide spiritual mentorship. Look for shared interests with younger people. Might be career, might be hobbies. You know, I think that it's a natural way to start to build a relationship with other people, even though there may be an age gap or generation gap. Look for people that remind you of yourself at a younger age, and where you think you may have learned something, hopefully that might be beneficial to them. And see if there's a way to find a mutual interest that could create an ongoing dialogue. You know, I mean, one of the things in my career, you know, I think about some of the people I know, and unfortunately, they both, some of the key people that I really wanted to talk to both died young, you know, and when I got to the point in my career when I realized I really could use their expertise, they weren't there anymore, you know? And so, you know, I think that is an opportunity. And the other thing that we have here until we're totally incapacitated is there is prayer, is always available. I think my parents used to take us to nursing homes to visit, and I remember we went in this one, and my mom and dad, they used to pick out people and said, well, that's what I'll be like. I know, and this is what I'll be like. So my dad was like this guy that was going to be this guy that habitually went around and checked all the doors at night to make sure they were locked, right? Because he was the custodian at church, and also when we were teenagers, my dad after when we came in late, he would go down and lock the door, you know, for the night, right? So that was going to be him. And there was this one lady at this nursing home we went to, and she would have these things where she'd cry out, Jesus, help me! Jesus, help me! And my mom said, that's what I'm going to be like. I'm going to be out of my mind. I'm still going to be praying. I'm still going to be asking the Lord. No, I need help. I don't know. Yeah. And finishing strong. You know, we always may reach the point where we lose physical strength or mental acuity. So we, again, reinforcing what we talked about earlier, it's good to plan for that before it happens. And also, I think, keep staying busy and as long as we can, and committing the rest to the Lord. Maintaining spiritual vigilance and focus. 2 Timothy 4:7-8. You know, I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith, and there's laid up for me a